just running a little late with the schedule. No worries. We'll make it up as we go today. So very excited for the next presentation. I'm going to hand it off to them and get going. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, Spin VFX.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. We're super excited to be here, and we've got a lot to cover. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to be covering over this hour, so bear with me. My approach for design is a little bit different than what you've seen probably in the past few days. So hopefully you'll find it useful and exciting for you guys. So who are we? Well, to my right is Colin.
Hello, my name is Colin Davies. I'm a visual effects supervisor and one of the partners at Spin VFX in Toronto. It's great to be here. Cesar has been a great ambassador for me. I'm not really a ZBrush, I'm not at all a designer or ZBrush person. It's not my background, but it's fascinating to me. It's been fascinating working with Cesar and learning from him. My background is in film. I went to film school, worked on set for a while, got into editorial and post, and that was kind of my entree into computer graphics. Worked at Mainframe Entertainment back in the 90s as an editor and then a director, and then got into visual effects when I joined Spin in 1999. I've been doing this for over 20 years now, which is hard to believe. Yeah, we sort of, I've kind of grown with Spin. We've changed a lot over the years, and in a minute we'll sort of show you a little bit about what we do. And I think probably most of you know Cesar.
One of the cool things about this particular presentation is when we got to talking about how we were going to do it and what we wanted to present, we kind of struck on the idea of kind of doing it from a client perspective, and where the client sees the ZBrush being used and how that works within their perspective of the workflow. So I'm Cesar DeCall Jr. I'm old. I'm sure most of you have seen some of my work or have maybe seen some of my tutorials out there and whatnot. Thank you. But we're, anyways, enough about me. Let's get right into it because there's a lot to cover. So Spin VFX history. Instead of us getting on right into that right away, let me show you a video here.
This is our latest reel, so this will give you a bit of a taste for what we do.
Thank you.
It's fun stuff. Yeah, so that shows you that we do kind of a broad spectrum of things. 30 years ago or so, Spin started out as really a boutique high-end compositing place. We were into early adopters of Flame, Inferno. It was, back in those days, it was, you know, $900 an hour Flame suites and finishing and all that. So started out in that world. I joined Spin in '99. Just as that was starting to go away. We were getting more into CG at that time, longer form things. I actually came over for an IMAX project. And the commercial work was changing. We were getting more into doing 3D and using Nuke, and pipeline was changing. The whole sort of commercial sector was changing. We saw really the opportunities for growth and just creativity really in longer form stuff. So we started getting into television shows, films, and over the years we've grown. We're at about, fluctuates, but we're around about 150 people now. We're in Toronto, and we've got anywhere from sort of 3 to 5 TV shows going at any given time, and 2 to 3 films. Usually we're taking pieces of these things. Occasionally we'll take on the whole project. You know, the interesting thing about what we're going to talk about today is actually kind of a departure for the stuff that you've seen and the stuff that you've seen this weekend. And one of the things that we try and do when we're working on projects is look for opportunities where we can use the project to kind of push some aspect of the way we do our work, some piece of the pipeline, and we're going to talk a little bit sort of about how we do that during this talk here. But that's kind of the lowdown on Spin.
So, the Descendants. We've got one more video. How many of you are familiar with the Descendants?
You guys are not really the demographic.
You're not the demographic, and you don't. You probably don't have kids. Both Colin and I have daughters who are crazy about the Descendants, and one of the key factors for my accepting to go work there was actually the Descendants, where I knew I was going to be a hero in my daughter's eyes. So, so for you that are not familiar with that, I just want to show you a quick little trailer so that you understand the world and how we approach designing for that world. Because it's one thing for you to design and just go mental and do all the sorts of things, but you have to serve somebody. You have to serve a client, and you need to understand what kind of product you're making.
This is from the first film, or first project.
Home to the most infamous villains that have ever lived. Cruella de Vil, Jafar, the Evil Queen, and Maleficent. Each one has a child that has never left their side until now.
You're going to be crowned king next month.
I've chosen my first official proclamation. The children of the Isle of the Lost should be given a chance to live here in Ordon.
You four have been chosen to go to a different school, Ordon. What?
I don't do uniforms.
Prissy pink princesses.
They allow dogs.
You are not going to see me start doing curtain. It's all about world domination.
What do you think your parents are going to do if we don't pull this off? They will be proud of us for doing our best.
Really?
No, I think we are definitely goners.
Disney's Descendants, the Disney Channel movie event of the year on Disney Channel.
So there you go. That's, there's a very specific design language, a very specific world that our character needs to inhabit. So if I were to do a Game of Thrones style dragon design, it wouldn't fit within that world. So you have to, when you're designing, you have to really design specifically for that. With this in mind, here's this disclaimer, right? There is no right way to design. And this is because, you know, one of the things that I know is that the audience is full of people that are professionals here. But I'm sure there's thousands of people that are watching that are wishing and wanting to work in this industry who have never done it and maybe are confused and don't understand what way to go about it. And I want to also make it so that they can understand the process. Everyone has their own. I mean, if you guys have come and watched the other ones, every single person has their, that's one of the beautiful things about ZBrush, is that you can take your own approach to design and creating. And what I'm showing you today is hopefully a different way that allows a lot of flexibility when dealing directly with the client for changes specifically. So the methodology and approach that I'm showing, what I'm showing today, works for me. Take what you deem useful and toss out the rest. So, client is king. Hands down. You know, it's not about me, it's not about what I want, it's what, in this case, it's about what Colin wants. And Colin also has a client, which in your case?
Well, the Disney Channel is the ultimate client, but creatively, Kenny Ortega, the director of the first, really the writer and director of the first and the second movie, is my client. And he's the one that I'm dealing with to, you know, first of all, try to understand what it is that he needs for his film. He really knows this world. He created this world. He understands his audience. I can tell you, I have a lot of street cred with the fourth graders in my daughter's school. He knows how to hit a bullseye with his audience, and he's very clear about that. He knows what he wants, and so, you know, my job as a visual effects supervisor on the show is to get an understanding of that and facilitate the communication between him, between Cesar, try to help guide the process. And it was a fascinating process for me. I've done this before, but this is the first time I've done it with Cesar and with Cesar's way of working, and it really was really quite remarkable.
So what the client's needs become your needs, right? That's golden rule. You're serving somebody, so when changes come along, you can't be like, you can't change that. You know, I've spent 2 nights working on, no, you change it. Separate wants out of the equation. It's really important that communication be clear. So there's a bunch of the stuff that I'm going to be talking. I'm trying to rush through as much of this, but I really think this is super important because everybody talks and shows a bunch of flashy stuff, but they don't necessarily talk about what really happens when you sit down to design something with the client in the end. So Colin Davis was, you know, the visual effects supervisor on Descendants 2. He was my conduit to the powers over at Disney. That meant that even though that Colin was my day-to-day client, he too was serving the client on his end, where this is where communication becomes super important. So we need to speak the same language. It's like you saying, I'm going to go to Japan, but you learn French. Doesn't really help you, you know. So you really need to be on the same page. Now, the number one question is, what is design? So design, to me, design is a process of elimination through creation. That's the way I see design in a nutshell. It's trying to get to the core of what do you have inside of your head? Because not everybody, I'll give you an example. I worked with a director on a particular movie, and the movie had vampires and werewolves and all of these creatures in it, and he hadn't seen any of those types of movies, but he was directing it. So the first meeting I had with him, I said, oh, we're designing werewolves. What sort of werewolves are we doing? Are we doing American Werewolf in London? Or are we doing, you know, Rob Bottin, The Howling? And he said, I haven't seen those. So I knew I was in trouble. I knew I needed to find a different way to communicate with him because otherwise I wouldn't be going anywhere in terms of my design and my designs. So historically, design's been done in a linear way, and I'll show you. So this is the way design historically has been done. There's a discovery stage, right? The client introduces a concept, or you know, or it can be in written, it can be a script form, it can be whatever. But you go through a discovery phase where you're trying to get a clear picture, and you go through a systematic approach trying to understand what that is. Usually there's iterations. Those iterations is a back and forth process. When there's some sort of approval, it goes into production. In this case, we are 3D building, so it goes into a 3D build. There can be, you know, revisions and redesigns and all that sort of stuff. this is the traditional way, the way it used to be done, which is, you know, somebody would sit down and do a drawing, or they do a whole bunch of drawings, and then it would go into like a maquette form, and then that would eventually propagate down stream.
And actually, if I could just interrupt
for a
second, that's the way I thought we were going to do it too, because that's the way I've kind of done it. And my big thing is I want to try to get momentum going with a client. Once you start to understand or try to understand what they're after, you need to get some momentum. So for me, that's about speed and flexibility. And traditionally, the way we've done that is through drawing, because you can quickly sketch things up and try different things and hone in on what it is that people like. So that's what I thought was going to happen. And Cesar kind of came to me and said, I have an idea. What if I show you a different way to do this? And you know, you're going to hear about that right now, basically. But for me, the key thing is the speed and the flexibility, because if you can start getting some quick feedback, quick changes, and get the sense that, you know, you're posing the questions, listening to the answers, the listening is really important, and then showing them the change, so that you show that, yes, I heard what you said, and here it is. And if you can get that momentum going, that speed going, then you're on the right track. It goes a lot smoother. So that's what I was after.
So what we want to do is we want to eliminate and or reduce the back and forth. It's the back and forth that takes time and costs a lot of money, right? So that's what we want to do. So forward progression without new iterations. So 3D. So 3D, it's the same thing. It still starts off the same way. You've got a script, client comes to you or has a general concept, a direction they want to go to. You sit down, you go through the discovery phase. That's where things become clearer. I call that the design funnel. I'll show you that in a second. Now we're into the computer. Now we're doing 3D iterations. So no longer do we have the 2D. The 2D's gone. We're doing 3D iterations. Is 2D dead? No, it's not dead. But 3D allows us to continuously move forward and get to where we want much, much faster. As soon as we've got, so I'll give an example from a 2D standpoint. Let's say we got an approval on a 2D. Now we have to go through orthographics and create orthographics. Then those orthographics then get translated into 3D. But those 2D orthographics don't necessarily represent, because as soon as you see something in 3D, it's not quite the way you imagined it. So now you're going through, you're going back and you're redesigning. So you're creating this loop where in 3D, what I spit out is exactly what they're going to get. So every single view that they approve, it's exactly the view that they wanted to begin with. So there are no more iterations.
And I've really been there too. Like, this has happened more than once, and I'm sure many of you have had this experience too, where you have a sketch and there's something about the gesture of a nose or something in 2D that just works. It captures something, people love it. And then you start trying to get that in 3D, and you're just constantly here. It's not the same. It doesn't have the same feeling. And, you know, on a piece of paper, it's just a little squiggle. And now you've got to make it work in 3 dimensions, and that can take a surprisingly long amount of time, as I'm sure many of you have been through. So that was one of the beauties of this process. So what you see is what you get.
One of the other great things too, since there's so many people in the audience that do toys and all that sort of stuff, of course, when you're done that design is now a shareable asset. So that, as long as it's been approved, now it can go to toy manufacturing, it can do all sorts of different things. So you're killing a whole bunch of birds with one stone. Forgive me, I love animals. I don't mean that. So production, as soon as it's done, it goes through. Revisions, if we need to do revisions, it's a very easy thing. I'll show you with when we progress forward. So the linear workflow is what we're trying to get rid of. Designing with layers. How many of you have ever worked with layers inside of ZBrush? All right, all right. I'm happy to hear that. If you haven't, open up and start, because it is unbelievable what you can do. So working directly with the client, what does it give me with layers? It gives me the freedom of change. It allows me to, you know, time and budget and dictate what is possible. So where do we start? Back to the design funnel. So what is the design funnel? The design funnel is our first meeting with our art director, producer, director, whoever it may be, where you sit down in a meeting with them and you say, okay, so what are we doing? And then you start figuring it out. Okay, the conduit, I call it the conduit to the subconscious needs, right? So it's figuring out a pattern of, or a spectrum. So the spectrum is absolutely everything. It can be anything, right? Like the dragon, I mean, it can be anything. Like if you think about it, right? Dragons don't exist. That allows us to really go anywhere with it. But we need to understand the story. Where does it fit within the story? What's the spectrum? What do we want to get out of it? So the entire spectrum is open to you and anything's possible. So you have to start asking questions. What type of show is this? These are the questions that I go through so that I understand and I'm getting clear in my head. And with every single one of these questions that I ask, what I'm doing is that entire spectrum starts getting reduced. I start eliminating all those possibilities until I know a direction and I'm not shooting in the dark anymore. So, who's the audience? That's important. You need to understand who the audience is for what you're creating. What side of the spectrum are we? Are we scary or are we cute? What does the character need to do in the film? That's huge. You can, it's the old T-Rex thing. You design something with tiny arms, but yet it's got to do all of this great stuff. You got to know that. Know that ahead. Are there any specific design traits? Is there a scar? Is there a deformity? Is there an Achilles heel in the story that it needs to have that makes it, the thing that the hero needs to do? It's like the AT-ATs. It was there, it was the harpooning the legs that brought them down. That's the Achilles heel of the AT-ATs. So asking the questions, what is the personality? Where does the character live? The environment? How old? How big is it? So on and so on. We get something in the end that starts us down the track of the conversation. Number one rule, plausibility. Anything you do in film, anything you do in games, anything you do you gotta start with plausibility. Why? Because let's say you're watching a movie. How many times have you watched the movie and you've seen a creature come up and then all of a sudden it has 50 horns all over it and there's no rhyme or reason for it, but somebody decided it looked cool. But what it did was it made you pay attention to the character instead of the story. You've broken the number one rule of plausibility. Plausibility keeps you involved in the story. You need to serve the story always with your designs. Mother Nature designs with purpose. Everything has a reason for its existence. So, look at all this stuff. I could not design anything that Mother Nature, I guarantee you, anything that I've ever imagined, Mother Nature's already come up with it. She breaks the rules all the time with scale and, look at this. There's beauty, surround yourself with real world reference. I know everybody loves ArtStation. ArtStation's fantastic, guys, but don't use that as your sole purpose, your sole reason, and that as your inspiration. Mother Nature is the best artist, I guarantee you. Hands down, over and over and over again. ZBrush, changing the way we design. ZBrush blurred the line with modeling. I remember when ZBrush came around and we were trying to use it in 300. It was the first time we were trying to use it. It was in 300. And the texturing department came to me and said, well, wait a minute. Where does texturing begin? So there was this whole conversation of where does modeling begin and where does texturing start and so we had to figure it out. Right now it's all together. Well, now, everything I do from concepting, from my department, what I'm spitting out, it's going down the entire chain. It's affecting everybody. So concepting used to be that you would just sit down, you would do a drawing, you would give it, just hand it off to somebody, and that was it. That's not the way it is anymore, guys. Production, specifically designing for productions, unless you're working at like one of those studios, and I won't name any of them, but one of those studios where all they do is design specific in it and they're handing it out to production companies. But if you're working at a company where you're doing design and they're also doing production aspects of it, you need to understand down the chain. You need to understand rigging. You need to understand, how it's going to affect everybody else. So you have to be thinking about that all the way through.
And I want to just sort of dwell on that for a second, because that was one of the things that really impressed me with the way that Cesar approaches things. I mean, he has such a deep knowledge of not only ZBrush, but just 3D and modeling and everything. And we were able to, I mean, one of the things that I have to be responsible for as the visual effects supervisor is not only the, you know, the visuals and things like that, but you have to look at schedules and budgets and things like that. And to be able to leverage all of this work that's gone into the process up front and see that pay off again and again down the road, not just it was sort of a clarity about what the design is, but actually an asset, like a thing that you can use. And it's more than a starting point. It's way beyond a starting point. You know, you can, and it's that for modeling, texturing, and rigging. And we were able to really leverage that in a way that we've been using ZBrush for years for a variety of different things, but this is the deepest integration that I've ever seen, and it helped us a lot to kind of stay on track and get things done.
Thanks for that, man. Round of applause, so fair in the front. Designing in layers. So it's a choice that has to be made at the start. You can't. I suppose you could retroactively, and I've had cases where I've had to retroactively build something and get it to this point. But you have to make a cognizant decision that this is the type of workflow that you're going to go down, and you want to implement this into your workflow. So again, what I'm about to show you is not revolutionary, it's a workflow. It's a non-traditional history stack that allows modification. That's basically about what it is. So before there were layers, there was morph targets. And I used to bug O'Fair all the time, you know, whenever I saw him. He's like, I need more morph targets. I love morph targets. Can I have 4 morph targets? And he said, I'll do you one better. I'll give you layers. So, and again, that last line, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for ZBrush. Like, none of this. Like, the fact that I'm able to do this and work the way, like, I've sat down with directors, producers, art directors, and on the fly, I've designed things, and it's what's amazing is you get these people, like I said, like you have somebody who doesn't have a background or knowledge of anything, but you can sit down with them and they become kids. Like I tell O'Fair, it's hilarious. They become giddy and excited because they're getting to, you know, to say, no, I want this, I want that, you know, and they get to do it on the fly, which is great. So building a dragon, it can be anything. So let me show you wing anatomy. So the very first thing that you got to do when you're building a dragon is, for production, is I got to use this thing, right? I have to use this thing later on. So I need to figure out that #1 rule of plausibility. So how does the wing work? How am I going to hook up the rest of the anatomy? Do the wings, when the arms are moving, are the wings moving? Are they separated? Are the muscles separated? So what is that? So the very first thing that I did was I basically went in and created myself a little anatomy test. And what's great about ZBrush is that I can come in here and with timeline and create little cycles that allow me to see, like, how do the wings work? What's, you know, will I have room for the scapula in there to move? Will the muscles be able to attach? So can I have them separate? So one of the things that came out of the design is that we realized that we needed to extend the ribs up higher, up into the neck. So by extending the ribs up, we were given more contact points for the neck muscles and all that sort of stuff. And then coming up with, so how do, you know, what are the bones like? So you figure this out very, very quickly. And unfortunately, like I said, there's so much I want to cover, guys. And any of you, like if you're interested in specifics, come talk to me, and like I can talk you through specifics afterwards. But there's so much I want to cover. There's so much that I want to show you guys. I can explain specifically how I did all this. But it's nothing more than coming in, and as you can see, I have layers here, and I just have different shapes, and I'm animating those 2 shapes that allow me to come in here and cycle through this and see whether or not it's functional. Let me jump back and forth here.
One of the things too that, you know, for us as a company, we took advantage of the fact that we had a client that wanted a dragon, was you know, it was a big deal for them in their film. When you actually look at it, the dragon actually appears, and there's another big character too. The Uma character was an octopus with sort of the daughter of Ursula. We were really interested in over delivering on this. Like the actual requirements for the model and what it had to do were scoped for kind of a television perspective, but we really wanted to push the muscle system and the anatomy and use this as a chance to kind of stretch our pipeline a little bit too. So all of that early anatomy work, went into the rigging development, and we were using it all the way through.
And that's one of the great things. If you start doing these types of tests early on, you can start, the dialogue is immediate. Rigging isn't waiting for it later. They're seeing it, we're looking at it right away and starting to make plans for where we're going to go and what we need and what needs to be delivered. So concept is no longer about creating something that just looks cool. Concept now can also be the setup for the building blocks of all the departments coming thereafter. In other words, functional proof of concept. So like I said, the same way ZBrush changed texturing, it's now changing the way we look at concepting, like what is done in concepting. It's not just about creating a pretty picture anymore. So block it in. Don't rush this stage. There's too many anxieties over the initial block-in. Everybody's been in the, in those moments where it's just horrible at the beginning and you think you suck and you're like, oh God, why am I doing this? It doesn't, This is true for every hour. It's deep breath and, work your way through it. So let me jump into number 2 here. By the way, I'll show you this a little. Have you guys, maybe we can work on this. But one thing that I like is I like to keep my naming conventions. So one thing that I've gotten in the habit of doing is there's a little trick is I'll put a star up at the top so that when the file gets renamed, it doesn't rename my subtools, it just renames my star. So that's just a little thing that I do. So this is the way I block in a dragon. So it's nothing more than me coming in here and starting to select, and I usually the approach that I take is I will use an insert mesh, start with spheres, and just start dragging things out. You can see that that's literally what it is. I used the snake hook and I dragged this out, dragged out some fingers, got some general proportions of where the arms were, threw in a sphere for the for the chest, and did the same thing for the muscles, and nothing defined, nothing crazy. What I just want to do is I want to get some volumes in front of me that I can look at and kind of go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I mean, even if you guys watch the Funko presentation, it's a very similar approach. You can see here that I did with the jaw, with the eye, and the same thing with the brow. So I can make very quick, broad stroke adjustments of it. And that really allows us to start the dialogue in terms of where we're going. The other thing that I do is I use Z-spheres. So Z-spheres is one of those things that a lot of people have kind of, because of Dynamesh and all that sort of stuff, they tend to forget it's there. And it's super powerful, guys. Like you can really, it's like, I said at one of the SIGGRAPHs that to me it was like armature on crack. And I just loved it. I just love the idea that I could just go boom, 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 and it already had clay on it, And I come from the real world, so you're putting an armature wire, and then you're having to slap the clay on, and with Z-spheres, it's there. It's already there. It's all there for you. So it gives you the volume. It allows for joint placement, which is fantastic, and it's super fast. The IMM primitives, which is what I've already explained. The remesh scale and UV aspect of this. So resolution levels are important, and let me go back to this. The resolution levels are important. Oops, I thought there was another one there.
And just in terms of the design challenge on this job, we knew, first of all, this dragon is for Mal, who's the daughter of Maleficent. In the first movie, Maleficent turns into the dragon. We didn't work on the first film. And now the big reveal at the climax of the film is Mal turns into a dragon. So we knew that it needed to relate to the Maleficent dragon, but this is a teen dragon, if you will. And what does that mean? What does that look like? This is the Disney Channel, where we're not sure exactly where on the spectrum we need to sit here. Is it meant to be cute? Is it young? Is it ferocious, dangerous? So those were the sort of design questions that we were exploring, and I think we're going to get to some interesting sort of techniques for how we zeroed in on what was the right fit.
Got there. So when we go from this, ultimately what I want to do is I want to now start paring this down and getting this into. Remember, I said earlier how this is a choice you need to make at the beginning, right? So what I end up doing is I Dynamesh everything together. So I take all those forms, and you can still see the separation of them. And one of the really nice things about this approach is that it automatically already starts giving me form. So I'm not fighting this. And I didn't really have to fight very hard for this because I was just pushing around primitives. So I've already got structural anatomy in there that I can start defining. And it's very quick for you to do this. And a lot of people, when they're starting out, they tend to rush into the detailing. And you really want to, form, structure, understand all of the steps before you ever get into detailing. Detailing is the cherry on top. Detailing is kind of the last thing that you really want to be thinking about at this point. You really want the gross forms to kind of dictate what it is. So, I take all of those elements, I bring them together, I will do a Dynamesh on them, I will decimate that Dynamesh, and then from that I'll do a ZBrush. Very straightforward. Nothing crazy here. I'm not taking it outside, I'm not doing any retopology, I'm not doing anything. Then one of the things that I want is I want symmetry. Because I don't want to get into any weird, because I could have been pulling and I made a mistake or whatever, so I'll do a mirror on it. And the mirror will just guarantee me, it will give me that center line going down the middle, and it'll guarantee me that I've got something that's now perfectly symmetrical on both sides, that I can start sculpting with. And then I'll throw some UVs on there. The UVs, again, just go up in, the UV master, everything inside of ZBrush. This is stuff that I used to always have to go out. Now I don't have to anymore. It's all here. It's all quick. It's super quick. And within a few hours of you kind of messing around, you're ready to go. But you have to lay that foundation. You have to make the choices before you go down that path. So layers. So gross forms, base layer, and then breaking down design into elements, and then the design spectrum. So I'll show you here. There's two different files here. This one. So here I've gone in and I've basically did some sculpting. Went in, I've got a level of resolution, or what subtool am I on here? Oh, I'm on this. Oh, sorry, I combined these.
And
so
I know
maybe it's just 1 second. I think it's the other. But go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah.
So prior to this too, as part of the earlier part of the process, we had some reference. There were some sculptures that we were looking at. There was actually an early sketch from a production designer, and back to kind of what I try to do with these sorts of things is you want your first attempt to get you in the zone. So you're trying to make some judgments based on conversations, try to get something you're at least in the ballpark. And you do that by, looking at what they've done before and in the conversations. But once you plant that flag, that initial thing, and you get the feedback, then it's all about trying to find what the parameters are around that first attempt, and and then working your way towards that. And you do that in a couple of different ways. I mean, the way that we like to try and do it is not only are you progressing on the notes, but you're progressing on the kind of the level of finish that you're presenting. Initially, it's oftentimes this varies client to client, depending on what they're used to and how sophisticated they are. But you know, you can start with something that is gray shaded. There's no color yet, and it can be useful to show things in kind of a rougher state. That's a debate sometimes where people think, well, or there's an argument that, well, you need to show something in a more polished state to get people to buy off so they can make that leap. But I'm not so sure. Sometimes leaving something a little rough and with this room for a person's imagination can be helpful, because then they're not judging it as this is the thing. We know it's not the thing the first thing we show. We know we're on a kind of a journey here, and we want them to feel like, you know, we want the feedback. We want to hear what it is that you think and make them part of that process. And then each subsequent time we're showing the thing, there's similarity in what we've shown. There's sort of a continuity in what we're showing, presenting things maybe in a similar pose, but there's a progression. The next time it incorporates their notes, and then maybe there's color this time. And each time we try to have that progression to try and create that sense of momentum that we're actually getting to a closure on this thing, and don't get into some process where the design becomes an end in itself and you're just stuck in this loop where you're just constantly going round and round and round.
So one of the things with layers, or to me it's not, this is the most powerful aspect of layers to me, is that I can start breaking this down into real specific elements. So I can start looking at things like, okay, you know, closing the mouth. You know, that seems like such a small thing, but it's a huge thing in terms of, like, you design something with the mouth open and it looks great, and you close it and all of a sudden you discover that it's got an underbite. You know, it's like, oh, that's not what we wanted. You know, that wasn't, you know, or it's got an overbite and it looks goofy, you know. So understanding, being able to play around with these basic traits really allow you to come in here and start designing things. So you can come in here and I'll show you how I do this. Bear with me. Like I said, it's a lot of stuff to cover. But I can start coming in here and adjusting the width of something. And by creating these very specific, so even like the wings, you know, these very specific rules inside of ZBrush, I can start adjusting, you know, how big are my wings? Where do they sit within that? So I can sit with somebody who isn't a designer, and he can tell me, okay, because remember, it's not my design, it's the client's design. I can guide it down the line, I can show him different things, but at the end of the day, the person that has to say yay or nay, it's the client. They're the ones that are going to be like, that's what I want. So, so this whole process is about going in and start and giving ZBrush these rules essentially inside of layers that allow me to design on the fly. So I can come in here and adjust like the feet, you know, how smooth, how hard are those knuckles? You know, are they smooth knuckles? By the way, this is a female dragon. So figuring out, you know, how smooth should she be? How, you know, does she look female enough? You know, what traits make her female? You know, what type of forms does, you know, well, look, I've got fat here, so I can come in here and fill her up. Like, how much? You know, is she skinnier? I can start going reverse, you know.
And this was very useful, again, on the speed component of things, because, you know, because Cesar is so good at what he does, we were able to get kind of near the strike zone fairly early, and we kind of established a range of where this thing needed to be. So the effort that he put into setting all this stuff up was based on the knowledge that we're somewhere in here. And then the ability to, you see that, you can just sort of literally dial it in, and then you can quickly create some iterations, put that in front of the director, they make their feedback, and then it's not, you know, I mean, I was based in Toronto. They were shooting in Vancouver. I would go on set occasionally, and you know, for our shots, and I'd get something in front of the director. He's in the middle of shooting. He's a busy guy. He you know, makes his notes, and then it's the next day, and he gets to see the feedback. And that's what gets that sense of like, we're going places with this thing. And it builds a lot of confidence with the client, and it just gets you where you need to go a lot quicker. And all of this setup allows that kind of speed and flexibility.
And ultimately what we ended up with is with these three, again, it's that spectrum of like, where are we? Are we very cutesy? You know, so we ended up doing this kind of cutesy, or remember the type of movie it is, this cutesy look to it. Then we did like a midpoint, like, you know, is it a little bit more fierce? And then we did one that I called the Fox version, which is a little scarier, a little bit meatier. And then, because now it's that spectrum. Am I cute? Am I scary? Or am I in the middle? Thankfully, they went scary. So we were very happy that day because everybody at the studio was like, "Come on, scary, no Barney." So
and Kenny wanted there to be stakes. You know, he wanted it to be fierce, for it to feel dramatic, and so he went for it. He wanted something that had. It
was a very exciting day for sure. Designing scales. So. And I will show you guys how to set that up really quickly at the end here. Designing scales. So designing scales, there's surface directionality and wrinkles. I have a DVD here at Noman that goes into that sort of stuff, where I talk specifically about why wrinkles are formed and how, and compression zones and all that sort of stuff. Flare. So, Creature from the Black Lagoon. So flare. What's flare? By the way, my favorite monster, hands down. So what's flare? Flare is those scale patterns, you know, those big scale patterns that you see down the belly there and whatnot. Those are flares. So those are big areas that you really want, you know, to kind of decide at the beginning what they are. And once you do that, whoop, design and color. Let's go back here and let me load. Sorry, there's a lot of files, as you can see here. So I just need to make sure I'm on the right one here.
Well, while you're looking at that file, I have a question from the online call.
Go for it. Go for it.
Does the artist do all the artists sit at the same table as you with the client for feedback? Or is it just you at the table talking to the client when you're showing them the work?
It depends on the situation. In this situation, when we got involved, they were just beginning to shoot. Well, actually, they were based in Los Angeles. We had some phone conversations, and then when I went out there on set, I was having meetings with the director. It was just me, so I have to kind of be the conduit back to Cesar and the rest of the team. So I need to be, you know, making sure I ask the right questions and you know, properly hearing the answers to those questions. But other times, the people will come in and you know, Cesar is often part of meetings and you know, in pitching ideas and talking about things. It just really depends on the job.
Okay. Is there a question out here too? No. No question.
I have a question. Paul's going to take care of some. Chet, can you hear me? Hey, so Cesar, in the process there,
yes,
you were demonstrating for all the viewers at home and here in the studio audience, the iterations were then converted to 3 separate meshes from the layers. Those are, or do they continue to have active layers? That's
no, they no longer. At some point, what you'll do is you'll dial in all the numbers and come up with something that you like, right? So you'll dial in all those layers, and then you'll come up with like a version that you like, and then that version you'll combine everything and spit it out, and that becomes a version. Obviously, it's important for you to understand and have annotations of what all that was. So maybe save off a file with like version 1, you know, so that it has all those layers set up, and then you would do that for 2 and 3 and whatnot. But it's I like to spit it all out so that I have a nice cohesive unit that's done afterwards. It's like, okay, so this is one. And then we can just flip through them very quickly and see that. Because we've got different horns as well that we're playing around with and whatnot, horns end up being something that it's a lot harder to do, because especially once you start getting into having multiples of. So, yeah.
That's a great response, and I'm glad that we had a chance to sort of cover that. We're covering a lot of material in this brush. I don't want to shame on my own brush as well. It seems like what you're demonstrating, again, is an interactive sort of pre-visualization tool. It's really awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, the nice thing about the way Cesar works is he'll have a kind of a setup and a view, and we'll agree on some poses, and then we try to consistently present back the same pose, but with the changes, and then you can let the client, like you're always trying to kind of pose a question when you bring these things back, right? So you want to pose the question, and then if it's consistent in this presentation, then there's no extraneous problem. You're just A-Bing between this is what it was and this is what it is. And you know, he's very kind of organized, and we were.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, no, it worked. It worked very well.
There's a question here. What's your name? Alex, where are you from? Ireland. Wow. You came all the way from Ireland for this? A round of applause. All right. Good question.
Just wanted to know, with the layering system that you have, do you make these things in advance because you might anticipate that the client wants to change them, or do you wait until you get feedback from the client?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
One more time. Aside from being a very cute accent.
Sorry.
Want to give her a hug?
No.
All right then, let's try it again.
For the layering system that you have,
do
you set up all of these layers to change things like, you know, wingspan or the weight of the character before you meet with the client? Or,
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so so there's definitely two ways that you can do it. One way is setting it all up beforehand, which I recommend, because these guys don't have time. You know, like Colin was saying, they're on set and they're shooting and they don't have time. So that, you know, you want to be prepared for that. And then the other aspect of that is, you know, spur of the moment type things, and that happens as well. You'll have spur of the moment where like you're doing something and you might be moving something and they like it, and then that becomes a new version. So you have to have that flexibility. But the idea really is to give them something that they can quickly change on the fly. Any other questions? Just loud in.
In the back of your ball. Way in the back.
Way in the back. Let me get camera on the way up.
Really quickly, so I was very interested in the fact that you had the ability to iterate so quickly. But during that process between adding muscles to the bone and then skinning it and creating sort of your final, how often are you speaking with the client? How many times is it a weekly sort of delivery type schedule?
You want to take that client? Because I mean, it varies. I've had some clients where they want to be in touch daily, and some clients it's once a week. But you want to.
And this particular show, it was, I would say we were looking at approximately a once a week, except when I was on set, because then we would be able to have a much quicker kind of interaction, and I could get the feedback back, and in that way we were able to kind of speed the process up a little bit, because you have that one-on-one interaction. But yeah, you usually want to give yourself a little bit of time to, because it's not necessarily the norm to have the ability to turn these things around so quickly. So you want to give yourself a little bit of a buffer. And
so I've been told like our time is.
Okay.
So I'm gonna try to burn through some of these things.
I think it's going to be more Batman and less Robin.
So when I originally did this, the vector brushes weren't around. But now with vector brushes, I mean, it's unbelievable what you can do, right? I mean, it's absolutely incredible that I can take this and create that. That's unbelievable. You know, that is like, I don't know whether you guys understand, but that's like ridiculous. Like when I started playing around with this, I was just blown away so my entire scale process now is very different from when I did the Dragon. But yes, so with vector maps, you can really come in here and excuse me, because this is going to be really crazy and not very good. And since there's so much to cover, but you can see we can quickly create a bunch of cool scales on these things. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's so much fun. I'm sorry. I want to show you guys color, so I'm gonna skip the next one here. So yeah, so designing with color. So color, so it's really great about ZBrush is that, and I wanted to show you posing, but that's going to take too long. So with transpose and masking, we can get a pose and we can throw that onto a layer. And then with that, because I have UVs, I can now start painting really quickly. It's all poly-painted stuff. And please notice what I'm doing is it's not about perfection here. I want to make this point really, really clear. When I'm dealing with the client, as you kind of alluded to, but when I'm dealing with the client, what's really important is I want to keep the client focused on the answers that I need at that moment. So if I create like a really wonderful rendered thing, they might be looking at all the wrong things and commenting on all the wrong aspects. So what I want to do is just give them color. If it's color that I want an answer for, I'll just give them color. And I'll make it as basic as possible so that we can just start getting some information out of that. So things like, okay, so there's a black one, there's a green one, there's a greenish blue one, here's a more pink one, a purple one. And then what we want to do is have a consistency of the way we present this to the client. And the way I do that, and this is something that I'm always amazed that people aren't aware of, is that there's this great little thing down here called the Z App Link. And there's all these buttons. And if I come down here and let me dock this, and I do things like if I hold shift and I click that, I now have a front and a back, right? If I can turn that, I can choose like a different view, and I can make that a customizable view. I can bring this in and then make another customizable view. And by the way, see that even the scale patterns that we're creating on them are very broad stroke. So because scale patterns themselves and the scale size also dictate how big something is. So depending on how big the scales are, you need to, it can make the creature either look smaller or it can make it look bigger. So we kind of go with this mid-ground so that there's some information there, understanding that we're still trying to find like that exact, where does everything tie in together. But once this is done, I can save these views so that now from a client standpoint, every time I send any images that I render out of ZBrush, he can do a flip, an A-B flip, and see the differences, the changes, so that the camera's consistently the same every single time. There's nothing fancy about it. All I'm doing is, again, laser targeted, getting an answer.
Yeah, it works very well, because even just a slight shift is very distracting. You're trying to make a judgment on, like, should the chin be pointier or something, and if the thing is popping back and forth, it's hard to judge that stuff. So it seems like a small thing, but
so I'm going to rush through some of these things. So design look. So we got to approve of the volumetric design. We do a retop. So this is where it's now it now gets serious here, right? Where it's approved, it's going downstream. So we need to, and even at this stage, I'm doing a lot of stuff inside of ZBrush. So I'm not, we, you know, it has to work in our pipeline. So, you know, we're a Maya, Katana, you know. Do you want to talk a little bit about pipeline, or?
I could, but I don't know if that's what the people
Anyways,
want.
so it needs to work for all those things. So this is where we're making sure that the design will head all, will work for all that sort of stuff. And 9. Let's see if I can pick the right one. That's 6. Nope.
Yeah, I mean, just to, while we're loading here, I mean, it is a, you know, ZBrush, Maya, Katana, RenderMan, Nuke. That's kind of the main chain. We use a lot of Substance and Mari as well for texturing. This is the first time we really leveraged a lot of vector displacement, actually. We've done a little bit of it before, but
which is amazing, by the way. We're no longer displacements. We're a vector house. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable what we can get. So this is the retop dragon, and from this point we move it forward, and now we get into actually tightening up all those details and getting it to look pretty. So one of the things that we quickly realized is that we really wanted to push what we were doing. So we started splitting it up and using, you know, UDIMs and all that sort of stuff to really get lots and lots of detail out of that. So for our head, this is where we ended up. Bear with it. It's a lot of polygons.
Yeah, and when you see this, it'll be obvious that, you know, you don't want to do that amount of work on something that hasn't been kind of honed down to a fairly tight design.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. What I did was a masking, a lot of masking, a lot of alphas, a lot of morph target, a lot of layers, putting information into specific layers, and then using you know, the morph brush to go in and morph things back, and then going in and tightening all the details. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun, and I have to thank these guys because they were very patient with me. They were like, okay, go for it, just have fun, do it. So yeah, I'm very excited.
And it was great having Cesar there too, because, you know, obviously being the designer, he's thought so much about the anatomy of this creature, and when it came time to do blend shapes and blinks and wrinkles and rigging the thing, we always made sure that Cesar was in the room, because he knew exactly where skin was going to bunch and you know, where the scales are sliding or compressing. So that was another area where, you know, he's just pushing all of what he's doing, you know, down into the pipe, to everyone's benefit.
That we really did was, as you can see, we really pushed at every stage, and we think the results were, you know, maybe
pretty
I
nice.
can.
Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I'm mobile again. There's a question here.
Yeah.
Cameron, good to see you. Nice hat, by the way. Sporting the ZBrush logo.
For a layman, what is a UDIM?
With the lighting?
For a layman, what is a UDIM?
UDIM.
Oh, a UDIM. So a UDIM is basically, if you look at your UVs, there's a square that they live within, a 0 to 1, you know, a tangent space, and you know, or a map coordination. So a UDIM is every space that is past the 0 to 1. So you can have multiple spaces that are used, and it really allows you to have multiple maps on one particular character, and it's very fascinating. So, and it really allows you to push the levels of every single thing. And so that was one thing that we took advantage of, and really cranked up the levels on our characters for that.
It almost gives you unlimited resolution. You can just choose to have, you know, the same texture
11 and 12.
break it up amongst more and more UDIMs, and you get higher and higher resolution up to the point that you choke, basically.
Okay, this guy's been very patient. What's your name?
Hero?
Hero. Oh, hero, like a superhero. Hey, okay, where you from?
From Downey.
Downey, just down here, down the road. I know where that is. Okay, what's your question? Go ahead.
When you're in the early design stages, how early and how often do you discuss, when you're like figuring anatomy and so forth, how early and how often do you speak with like the rigging and animation departments to get them involved when figuring that stuff out?
Great question, right away. Absolutely right away, yeah. Nothing I do, nothing that gets created that leaves my department. Whether it's animation, whether it's, you know, yeah, whether it's animation, whether it's rigging, whether it's surfacing, I mean, it doesn't matter what department. The dialogue is consistent all the way, so that we're a team, so we're all on the same page. Everybody needs to understand what's coming and what's going to be used and how. So here's our dragon with all of scales and most of his detail. Like I said, we did split this up so that you can see a kind of a line here right now. So the wings don't have the fidelity, like we up-res those as well, and we got more fidelity. But I'm going to jump ahead here. And the point of no return. So I get this asked a lot, like even in production. Okay, so when do you get to the point where you can't go back? Well, you always have to go back. And as long as I have the layer system there, we can make those changes and propagate it back up the history stack. And that's the important part. So let's say the client comes back and says, you know what, we want the note to be longer. I can go back, adjust that, pump it back through, and then now we've got a brand new. So the history stack is really important. That's why I said it's a non-traditional history stack, but it's a way for you to maintain all of your work without necessarily having to keep a case history of everything along with it. So there is no point there. So when it comes all together, down the pipe, rigging, animation, all the departments, we get something like this. Oops. Okay.
There you go.
Play.
Just thinking about it. That one worked.
Well, that one worked. So there you have a render. This is a test where we bring in all the elements, have a look at all the scales, see how everything's coming together, and let me try that one more time. Let's see. It's a pity.
Yeah,
Sorry? It's part of the, yeah, something's gone corrupt on it. But you can see this on our site.
I believe so, yeah. Well, we'll put it on the site now. We've whetted everybody's appetite.
Yeah, but it's unfortunate because it goes through it's the muscles, the skin, everything's in here. I don't want to show you guys, but there you go. So let me show you though quickly just how and then I'll wrap it up. Just how I actually create a layer so that you guys can do this. So I'm going to make this a polymesh 3D. I'm going to frame this. And the first thing that I do is I'll create a layer, and I'll call this layer my base layer, let's say. So I'll name this, and I'll call this base. So right now it's in record mode. And what I want to do is, though, I want to store that. I want to make that a base layer. Because right now I haven't done anything other than create a layer. So what I do is I come down to my morph target down here, and I store a morph target. So now that's baked something into that layer. So now it's a base. Now I've got a base. So then now I can come back in here, create another one, and let's say I'll call this work, right? Just for this the sake of this demonstration. And I'll take my snake hook here. And so now I can do that. So now I've got that on one layer. So I've got a horn on that layer. So I can turn that off because I don't want this to be additive. So I've got my own layer. Now I'll create this and I'll call it work 2. Oops, sorry. Work 2. So now I've got you know, another layer on there. So now I can pull something else, a tail on it, for, let's say on the other side. So now, let's say I'm sitting down with the client. The client goes, "Oh, you know, I like that tail, but it's too long. Let's make it a short tail." You know, okay, so we can make that a short tail. And, "Oh, yeah, you know, but that horn that you did, I like that horn, but you know, I want that horn to be bigger." Well, I can't make it bigger because I can't. See, I can come down here and I can overcrank this. So now I can make the horn really big, right? So now I can save that. I can save that. I can say, okay, well, you like the horn really big, so I'll store that. I'll store that morph target, bring it back in here. So now I've got these two, but I don't want it to be additive. I want it to be separate, right? But I also don't want this over here. But I made a mistake. I stayed, you know, I stored that. Oh, what am I going to do? You know, poo-poo. No, so I can come back here, or you can name this, I can say, you know, new horn. Come in here, come into my morph target, and do a switch, because I had it as a morph target, so I've switched that. But on the other side, what did I switch? What was before? Oh, that was really nice, right? I have that, I've just switched it. It's in there, it's on the other side. So now I can go into my morph, I can go into my brush, go into my morph, come in here, and morph that up. Keep the horn. Super powerful, guys. Like crazy powerful. Like unbelievably powerful. I can't even begin to express like the amount of creativity that this opens up for you. And since you've got this all in layers, now you can go in there and do anything. Right? You want longer arms? Sure. Stretch them out. Now you've got arms. How long do you want them? I don't know. Dial them. So now the client's sitting next to you and it's like, oh, I want the arms to go beyond the knees. Okay, done. It's a slide. Oh, their eyes go, what? How did you do that? You know, so it's all about the setup. It's what you do at the beginning with the setup, and then, you know, it's unbelievable. So yeah, I know we're out of time. There's our questions?
No, we can take a question. Yeah, we got the lights on my face. Here we go. Question right here.
When you present that to clients and they see how easy you can slide that and make a change, do you let them know that you put a lot of work in to let that happen so they don't think it's that proverbial magic button? Because then they go, oh, well, just you know, hit that button and make it something else.
Call? Do you want to take that one?
I guess that could be an issue. I mean, this is my first time working this way, and I have to admit, like, I was sort of the proxy client for Cesar in this case, so I got to sit beside him, and actually, I was the one who got to say more or less and dial it back and forth, and I enjoyed that. You know, it was great to be able to have that level of interactivity. Because I was the buffer between this and our ultimate client, I was always very careful to kind of what we're presenting is in this kind of managed way, so that, you know, we want it to seem as though we're quick and on top of it and listening and getting their feedback to them. But you know, I guess there's a certain danger, you could say, with a certain, you know, if it seems too easy, it could be a bit of a problem. But I mean, you work this way with all kinds of different people over the years, right? And
yeah,
I guess ultimately people are looking to get what they're after. You know, like the process is fun for up to a point, but ultimately, if they're, particularly if it's a, you know, the people are paying and there's a schedule, they want to get there. So eventually, I imagine the buzz wears off and people just get down to like.
You have to. You're absolutely right. The buzz does wear off, but you have to. you have to have that dialogue at the beginning where you really understand, like, so that you're not, like, nothing pisses off a client more than you wasting their time or their money. So you can't be going on these wild goose, you know, like, you really need to get clear on what it is you're trying to go, and really understand that, so that when you're building it within realms. So I tend to be a spectrum designer, right? Like, I'm not a timid guy, so I tend to, like, okay, is it this or this? If it's not, you know, and we'll try to figure it out as quickly as possible so that we can get there. And then once we're there, we can have fun. Because what I want to avoid is getting into the 200, 300, 400 iteration things, because that's not fun for anybody. The client gets angry, the designers get angry, everybody's fed up with it. They just want to get to the heart of it. So it's really about being on the same page and really understanding that language. Like I said, if you're going to Japan, don't learn French. You know, understanding what that language is will get you to, you know, through those tough moments, that A, B, and C, and D, and whatnot. But it's the flexibility aspect of it that I found specifically. Like, this has been slowly developing over the last 9 years now. You know, that I've been doing this with different clients and trying to figure out, like, what they were asking for and what they needed and whatnot. So. But it's super powerful. I can't stress it enough, because it changes the whole way we look at design and concepting, because it's no longer about, oh, here, look, I created this really cool thing, and then you know, at some point I've had feedback in the past where even clients were, like, afraid of making too big changes because they realized, like it would hurt time, it would cost, you know. So this way they can make much broader strokes because they know it's not going to be that big of an impact.
All right, we'll take a question right here online, and then we'll get you to the back. Can you explain how you did the membranes for the wings? How did you guys approach that?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways, but I mean, you can. Yeah, of course, it's got layers. But yeah, I mean, that's literally what I did. I just kind of drew it out, you know. I just drew out the membrane, figured out what the shape was, and then started sculpting. I mean, in ZBrush, you know, membranes and I mean, the combination of that, because you're decimating and whatnot, and everything gets, you know, everything becomes contiguous at some point. Then it's all about, you know, the retopology so that it actually works and it's functional.
All right. All right, unfortunately, we got to get them to the back. Everybody spin VFX. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Oh.